Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network Team Autopsy Report. Folks, we have the Texas A&M Aggies on the autopsy table this morning. If you're watching on YouTube or streaming this on our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, I want to say thank you for joining us. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, thank you as well. For our podcast listeners, if there's anything that I reference that will be on the screen for those viewing, don't worry, I have you covered. Let's start right there with the head coach in Mike Elko. Now, Coach Elko was the defensive coordinator under Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, so kind of a return home from him after spending 2 years as the head coach of Duke. And while at Duke, had a really successful 2 years there, going 16-9 with winning seasons in both years. So the expectation was him coming to Texas A&M, he would bring back some of that defensive toughness that we saw while he was the defensive coordinator. And having a solid 8-4 season there last year, we'll start to see the trajectory of this program under his leadership. Let's start with the betting numbers first. This team had a season win total of 8.5 last year. Back in June, they fell short of that by half a game, so did not get you to the pay window if you took that over for Texas A&M. Now, when we look at our in-season composite win total, there are three very unique but very predictive statistical categories that we look at to project a team's actual wins during the season, and we were spot on with the Aggies. We had them as a 8.0, so we didn't think that they should have won or lost any more games than they won on their schedule last year. Now let's dive deeper into that schedule. As I mentioned, there are two components that we look at, and we both look at them equally: your strength of schedule and your strength of record. Now, it's important to note, when you play in a major conference like the Southeastern Conference or any of the top conferences um, at the Power Four level, you only control 25% of your schedule as far as who's going to be on it, and which is your non-conference. So for the SEC, currently with 8 conference games, 4 of your non-conference games you actually schedule. Your in-conference schedule is purely a luck of the draw. So when we look at Texas A&M, 0.532, that was the 20th toughest schedule in college football last year. When we look at their strength of record, now this you have no control over. Basically, it is how we look at it, your opponent's winning percentage, 0.591. That was the 27th toughest schedule in college football last year. So not only did they play a difficult schedule from a power ranking standpoint, but their opponents did a really good job of putting a lot of wins on the board last year. So for everyone that's watching, I'm going to pull this up on the screen, and for our podcast listeners, as I mentioned, I'm going to go through this for you. So let's take a look at Texas A&M opponents last year. Let's start with Notre Dame. Well, we know the Irish finished the regular season 11-1. Then they stepped out of conference to play an FCS opponent in McNeese. Florida was 7-5. Bowling Green was 7-5. Arkansas was 6-6. Now we're in conference play. Missouri 9-3. Mississippi State 2-10. LSU was 8-4. South Carolina 9-3. Their final non-conference game against New Mexico State 3-9. Auburn was 5-7, and then ending the season with the long start shootout against Texas. The Longhorns finished the regular season 11-1. So you're talking about two opponents that finished with 11 wins. 2 more teams finished the season 9 wins, and then you had LSU with 8. That is a very challenging schedule for me. And when I look at their 2 opponents with 2 and 3 wins, that more than balances out with the caliber of opponents that they played at the top of the food chain there. Now, let's talk about how good were the defenses that Texas A&M offense went up against last year. And we're going to start with using a baseline of 68. Basically, we use the number 68 because that's how many Power Four teams that were in college football last year when we look at the ACC, Big 10, Big 12, and Southeastern Conference, along with Notre Dame. So Notre Dame was our 9th best defense in college football last year. Florida was 17th. Bowling Green was 58th. Arkansas was 44th in defense. Missouri was 20th. LSU was 29th. South Carolina, 7th best defense last year. Auburn was 39th. And then Texas had the number 2 power ranked defense for us last year. If you average those out, the Aggies went up against a defense on a week in and week out basis that would have been power ranked 42nd. This is a defense that's probably on a 7-5, maybe, I would say 7-5 defense there. So while challenging, there was also some really soft pillow spots there in the middle of that schedule. Mississippi State was ranked 108th, and New Mexico State, one of the worst defenses in college football last year, 129th out of 134 teams. Now, let's go ahead and get into the offensive metrics here. And for the offense, I'm going to give all 3 numbers. I'm going to give the NCAA average, Texas A&M's accounting stats, or that's what we refer to it as, whatever their regular season number will show on any reference site. And then we'll give you our adjusted data point for that particular category. So let's start right there with the points per game. Average team last year was about 28 points per game. The Aggies were at 30.3. When we adjust for opponent, goes up about a field goal to 33.2 points per game. The average team last year passing offense, 227 yards per game. The Aggies were at 204 yards passing per game, but when we adjust for opponent, it does go up a little bit more to about 215 yards per game passing, still a little bit below the average team in college football. We'll talk about that a little bit more so here in just a few moments. The run game, average team last year, 160 yards per game rushing. The Aggies were at 199.2. But when we adjust for opponent, that goes up to 218 yards per game rushing. When you have a dual threat quarterback, you're going to see teams with a little bit better rushing numbers than their passing numbers. That's just kind of how it works out, because their natural instinct is to take off instead of trying to buy some time and throw for more yardage instead of using their God-gifted athletic ability. Okay, total offense, 387 yards per game is what the average team had last year. The Aggies were at 403. When we adjust for opponent, actually improves to 432, so almost a 30-yard per game improvement there when we adjust for opponent. Now, taking a deeper dive into the metrics, the average team drives ending with a score, either a touchdown or a field goal, was at 40% last year. The Aggies were at 54%. The average team drives ending with a touchdown was 29%. The Aggies were at 36.5%. And then third down conversion, average team was about 39%. But when we adjust for opponent, the Aggies were at 47.8%. So really solid offensive numbers there for a team that is led by a defensive-minded head coach there. This team also did a decent job of taking care of the quarterback. Even though you had a mobile quarterback, you see a lot of sacks with those quarterbacks. We didn't see that with Texas A&M. Only 22 sacks allowed during the regular season. That is actually about 2 sacks below what the average team allowed last year. And this team also did a really good job of taking care of the ball. 13 turnovers during the regular season. Again, phenomenal work. So when I look back at their schedule really quickly while I have this on the board, I'm trying to see if there was a game where they possibly could have pulled off an upset. And you would look at the game against Auburn and you're like, what in the world happened, giving up 43 points to the Auburn Tigers last year? Missed a golden opportunity to really improve that record. You win that game, you're now talking about a team that has 9 wins during the regular season, and you go into that game against Texas with a little bit more momentum. Feel like that was a lost opportunity there for the Aggies last year. So if I had to bullet point this offense, I would say it was solid. It just wasn't elite. And when I get into their 3 E's, how effective, how explosive, and how efficient this offense was last year, they were 38th in both effectiveness and explosiveness, 24th in efficiency. The Aggies ended the regular season for us as the 31st ranked offense in college football last year. So good job there by their offense. Now, remember I said the average power ranking for their defensive their opponents' defenses were 42nd. Let's take a look at what kind of offenses did this Aggie defense have to face on a week in and week out basis. And again, we'll use that baseline of 68. Notre Dame had the 4th best offense last year. Florida had the 25th best offense. Arkansas, 35th. Missouri had the 53rd best offense from a power ranking standpoint last year. Mississippi State, while they struggled on defense, their offense was not the issue. 39th there. LSU was 21st. South Carolina was 19th. Auburn was 56th, and then Texas was 6th. So week in and week out, they faced a really solid schedule. Now, it's to be noted that 2 of their opponents were outside of the top 90. Bowling Green was 93rd, and once again, New Mexico State was 120th. No surprising there that this team, when you have that bad of an offense and that bad of a defense, that they only won 3 games there. So average power ranking for Texas A&M's defensive opponents would have been about 43. So roughly about the same as their offense faced last year. Once again, you're talking about a team that would probably be borderline 7-5. If they squeezed it out hard enough, they may have been an 8-4 team from a pure power ranking standpoint, week in and week out. So solid schedule. Once again, just not an elite schedule. Once you start getting into the 30s, that's when you're really, really up against it from a scheduling standpoint. Now, I'm going to give you just the 2 numbers on the defensive side here. I'm going to give you their accounting stats number and then our adjusted number. The Aggies allowed 21.2 points per game. When we adjust that for opponent, goes down to 19.3, so about a 2-point per game improvement. When we look at their passing yards allowed, 227 yards per game. When we adjust that for opponent, roughly the same, 234 yards per game. So about a 3-yard per game passing improvement there. As far as their rush defense, now this is where we're going to see a major swing here. On the surface, we're looking at a team that gave up 138 yards per game rushing. When we adjust that for opponent, it goes down to 111. So a 27-yard per game improvement there when we adjust for defenses. That's what you want to see from your defense. You want to see those numbers adjusted towards the positive based on the strength of the teams that you went up against. And then total offense, 365 yards per game. But when we adjust that for opponent, it improves by almost 31 yards to 334. This team was even better than what their raw accounting stats say they were on a week in and week out basis. As far as their opponent's drives ending with a score, 30%, almost a 10 percentage improvement over the average team. Opponent's drives ending with a touchdown, 17%. Again, double-digit improvement there. And as far as their opponents converting on third downs, just 28% is what their opponents were converting on third downs. Again, 10 percentage points better than the average. This team was right at the average, getting to the opponent's quarterback, 24 sacks. With the number of defensive players that they had drafted in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft, you would have liked to see this number in the 30s for the regular season. So they did a good job of getting to the quarterback, just not an elite job of getting to the quarterback. So that's something to keep in mind, keep an eye on for the 2025 season. They also forced 17 turnovers. Their opponents did not have a lot of success going forward on fourth downs. 27 attempts, only 13 conversions, 48%, about a 5 percentage point improvement over the average. When we look at Texas A&M's 3 E's, they were the 22nd best defense as far as an effectiveness ranking, 35th in lack of giving up explosive plays to their opponents. And then as far as efficiency goes, they were 25th. The Aggies ended the regular season for us as our 24th ranked defense in college football. So the defense was strong, but inconsistent. I would absolutely agree with that. Now let's take a look at their special teams. Special teams, I would say from a bullet point standpoint, reliable, but not great. And here's why. 18 for 21, field goal conversion there. That's 86%. Now that is well above average. They also made all of their extra points. But here's why I say reliable but not great. The punting game. They averaged about 4 punts per game, only 39.7 yards per punt. That puts you in the bottom portion of college football last year, 121st ranked in that category. They were +4 in the turnover differential. The penalties need to come down. 8 penalties per game for 69 yards in penalties there. So need to improve on that. As far as Mike Elko coaching in situational play last year as the head coach, 2-0 in one-score games. No, that's not right here. Let me take a look at their one-score games because I think we may have had a snafu with the data. Okay, so they lost the one-score game against Auburn, and they were. So it looks like 1-1 in one-score games. I'll have to go back and look and see why we had that error. Want to apologize for that. So the Aggies were 1-1 in one-score games, and then as far as against quality opponents, 4-2 in games against quality opponents. Their fourth down conversion rate, 50%. That's about average 5 out of 10. Elko goes for it on fourth down about 8.8% of the time. Makes sense for a defensive-minded head coach there. Ranks him 124th out of 144 qualifying teams last year. Now, when we look at the splits for this team last year's force, how their offense looked in their wins versus their losses. In 8 wins last year, this offense was scoring about 35 points per game, 212 yards passing on 25 attempts, 8.3 yards per attempt, 13.9 yards per completion. Running the ball, this team was going to run the ball quite a bit, whether they won or lost, because, like I said, having a running quarterback, 41 rushing attempts per game, 229 yards per game, 5.6 yards per rushing attempt. They were averaging just 67 plays per game, but for 441 yards in total offense, 6.6 yards per play. Again, I talked about the penalties. Even in their wins, 8 penalties per game, way too high. As far as third down conversion, converting about 47% on third downs and had just 6 turnovers in those 8 victories. In their 4 losses, you're looking at a team that was averaging about 20 points per game, 29 pass attempts per game, only 187 yards per game, passing 6.5 yards per attempt, 11 yards per completion. Again, like I said, the rushing attempts virtually identical. It's just the yardage that goes way down, about 90 yards per game difference to 139 yards per game rushing in those 4 losses, 3.3 yards per rushing attempt, 71 plays per game. But as I mentioned, the yardage per game goes down by 115 yards to 326 yards per game in total offense, 4.6 yards per play, 6.5 penalties per game. So the penalties actually come down a little bit, but so does the third down conversion rate. In those 4 losses, the Aggies were converting about 38% on third downs, and in those 4 losses had 7 turnovers. Let's take a look at their splits from the defensive side of the ball here. Or before I do that, let me talk really quickly about the quarterback here. Marcel Reed, in 11 games last year, completed just 61% of his passes, 1,864 yards, 15 touchdowns to 6 INTs. The INT ratio is way out of whack there for me, as well as the lack of completion percentage there. 7.8 yards per attempt, 170 yards per game passing. That, folks, just looking at that data, if I'm playing the Aggies next year, I'm not blitzing this quarterback for any reason. I'm playing a lot of what we'll call a big nickel defense, where I take out the linebacker. So I have my 3 down linemen. Now I have 3 linebackers, and then I have 5 secondary players. So I'm bringing in a 3rd safety for pure speed, and I'm making sure that this kid does not have any run lane. So I'm not blitzing him. I'm going to force him to play the quarterback position, and I'm going to force him to play it from the pocket, because what he is as a rusher is way more terrifying for me than what he is as a passer. So that's something that I would be on the lookout there. Now, let's take a look at the defensive splits here. In those 8 victories, the Aggie defense was giving up just about 15 points per game. Their opponents throwing for about 225 yards on 34 attempts, 6.6 yards per attempt, 13 yards per completion. Their rush defense in those victories, absolutely dominant. 95 yards per game allowed on 30 rushing attempts, 3.1 yards per rushing attempt. Opponents about 65 plays per game for 320 yards of total offense, 5 yards per play. Their defensive numbers virtually identical in their wins and losses, as far as their opponents converting on 3rd downs, just 33% there. The big difference is this defense in those 8 victories forced 13 turnovers. In those 4 losses, only 4 turnovers. So that's the big difference there. In those losses, as I mentioned, 32 points per game allowed. Now, the passing yardage goes down for their opponents to 230 yards per game passing, but on 29 attempts. So the yards per attempt goes up to 7.9. Yards per completion stays about the same, 13.7. So you know where the bugaboo is going to be at. That is the rush defense. 42 rushing attempts per game. So their opponents running the ball almost 12 more times per game, to the tune of 223 yards per game rushing. That's 128 yard per game swing there. 5.3 yards per rushing attempt in those losses. Opponents running 71 plays for 453 yards, 6.4 yards per play. As I mentioned, the 3rd down and turnover differential there. So when this defense was on the field a lot last year, they were getting carved up in the running game. Let's get to the final grade and the final verdict. The Texas A&M Aggies will get a final grade of a B. What went wrong for the team last year? Penalties were costly, struggled against teams that could extend drives, and rush defense was absolutely inconsistent. What were their strengths? A strong rushing attack led by a dual threat quarterback, solid defensive efficiencies. Special teams gave us some good and some bad. Now, the final verdict for the Aggies. Texas A&M was a solid team, but struggled with discipline, 4th down stops, and an inconsistent pass defense. If they can clean up the penalties and improve their play, both on the defensive side of the ball, and considering the quality of players that they lost, is going to be a challenge for Mike Elko in year number 2. So in our final minute or so, I'm going to give you 3 keys for the Texas A&M Aggies for 2025. Establish stability with the quarterback play. I talked about it. Marcel Reed, I am not blitzing this kid at all next year. If I'm an opposing team, I'm going to force him to beat me from the pocket and take away some of that athleticism by putting faster players on the field and not giving him a lot of rush lanes. So I'm going to force him to matriculate the ball down the field. Shout out to head coach Hank, the legendary Kansas City Chief coach Hank Schramm, for that line. Key number 2, improve the offensive consistency. When you're having a quarterback that's completing 61% of his passes, you're not going to be a consistent offense. Eliminate the stall drives and capitalize on scoring opportunities can only be assisted by having a quarterback and an offense that is much more consistent week in and week out, drive in and drive out. And then key number 3 is this team absolutely has to replace a lot of defensive players on that side of the ball, especially up front. Can the Aggies generate enough pass rush going into 2025 to make them a real threat in the Southeastern Conference? If the Aggies can improve in these areas, they can absolutely establish themselves as a serious SEC contender in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.